So this is leading to the outrage among the group. I know there were 44 sailors, but there were so many more people that helped this come about.
Hundreds of people worldwide that helped us in this endeavor.
Do you think they all shared this outrage that Israeli threats and sadism can't go on?
Well, putting people under siege has always been an outrage. My father flew in the Berlin airlift in 1949 when the Soviet Union tried to block off Berlin from the rest of the world. And so we had the Gaza Sea Lift, which unfortunately we didn't have the budget of the Berlin airlift, so we couldn't maintain it. But still, the principle is the same, that people should not be under siege. Throughout the history of the Mediterranean, that goes back thousands of years, seafarers from all the areas of the Mediterranean came and went and prospered through international commerce. And today that's true, except for Gaza, which has been around for 7,000 years, is locked off from the world. That is an outrage. And the fact that most Americans are barely aware of it, we needed to raise awareness of this fact.
So just for context, this voyage, this first voyage of the Free Gaza movement that set everything into motion subsequently for other voyages, took place before the really Cast Lead operation.
Yeah, it was the summer before Cast Lead. And let me point out that Israel occupied Gaza in 1967, and since that time, no boats had been able to come or go into Gaza for 41 years straight.
And certainly after the gas discoveries in 1999, they've had interest exploiting the resources of Gaza.
My colleague David Schermerhorn in one of the final chapters of the book described, the chapter's called Stealing Gaza's Gas, and basically since 1999 there's been efforts to isolate those gas fields.
And this is the outrage that led to, basically propelled the Freedom Sailors to challenge the siege on Gaza.
Of course, it goes back to 1967. In 1967, there was a U.S. naval ship called the USS Liberty that was deliberately attacked by Israeli forces. 34 American sailors were killed, and about 171 American sailors were wounded. There's a colleague, James Ennis, who lives here in Woodinville, Washington, who wrote a book, Assault on the Liberty, that describes that. Well, that was all hushed up by the Johnson administration in 1967. And so there's been several efforts of where Americans have been attacked and the main American public is being kept in the dark. Other hypocrisies as well. Of course, in 2005, the Israelis pulled about 8,000 settlers off of 40% of the land in the Gaza Strip. And then they claimed that Gaza was free. Well, Gaza was not free. Land access to the world was blocked. Sea access to the world was blocked. Airspace was blocked. So they just...
Human rights were blocked.
They kept claiming that Gaza was free, so the Free Gaza movement decided we would challenge that notion and see. If Gaza's free, then boats should be able to come and go into Gaza harbor by permission of the Gaza authorities and no one else.
When you arrived in Gaza harbor, the day after embarking, what was your cargo?
When you have 1.5 million people and you have 2 small fishing boats, your cargo is limited. And so, but we did bring a few tangible benefits. We brought in about 100 hearing aids for hearing impaired children at the Atfaluna Society, and we delivered those. We brought in EKG machines that we delivered to Al Auda Hospital and some of its satellite clinics. And we brought hope primarily. We brought hope to the Gazan people.
I like that you brought hope to the Gazan people.
That they were not forgotten. And if you go to Gaza, I've been going to Gaza since 1985. I've been there countless times, usually through the permission of Israeli authorities. But when you get to Gaza, what you realize is that they're not a backward third world people. They have doctors, they have engineers, they have all kinds of educated people who are educated all around the world. But what they don't have is their freedom. What they don't have is commerce. And when you talk to people from Gaza who are 80% aid dependent at this point, is that they don't want charity as much as they want their freedom so that they can guide their own destiny and their own future.
You mentioned the crumbling medical infrastructure of Gaza, and that's directly related to unnecessary deaths.
And since this siege was tightened, medical supplies have been rationed. What actually gets in and out of Gaza.
Things like chemotherapy drugs.
Yeah, in the area of oncology, for example, there's cancer chemotherapeutic agents that are limited such that oncologists have to choose between giving one patient a full course of therapy versus giving several patients a partial course of therapy.
It's not related to Israel's security in any way whatsoever. It's just sadism.
Well, it does seem to be a little excessively cruel, and it defies explanation from a purely security standpoint. But what I would point out is that Israel always uses security as their excuse, and their security seems to always come at the expense of Palestinian and other people's security. For example, in Gaza, there is agricultural land, believe it or not. It's one of the most densely populated places on the planet, but on the periphery of Gaza, they had citrus groves, they had olive orchards, and most of these have been leveled by Israeli Caterpillar bulldozers and tanks, and the irrigation system's been ripped up, and that was all, and there's been a 300-meter security zone that's been expanded into Gaza, supposedly for Israeli security, but again, it interferes with Palestinians' ability to be self-reliant.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it has anything to do with Israeli security. It sounds a lot like sadism. And
well,
that was mentioned in the book.
They can use the excuse. It is true that a few Qassam bottle rockets have been fired out of these orchards. That's probably true. But again, Israel's security comes at massive. You totally interfere with the Palestinians' security. I'm for security of all people, not just one people. And I don't know how, when Israel's security comes at the expense of Palestinian security, how does that lead to a better future?
Well, those Qassam rockets have harmed very few people. It's the old eye for an eyelash.
Yeah, to date it's been about 13 people in the last 12 years. Countless more have died on Israeli highways, yet they're not putting an end to cars in Israel.
Well, you mentioned that there was aid dependency as you explored again Gaza. You noticed the malnutrition there. It's not like they're not getting food. They're getting low quality food. They're not seeing vegetables. They're not getting good protein.
And of course, one of the successes of Free Gaza movement and the subsequent flotilla is that it has increased the pressure on Israeli authorities to loosen up what kind of foodstuffs are allowed into Gaza. But for many years, there is malnutrition, there's protein deficiency, there's kids who have growth stunting, who are losing their secondary teeth, whose cognitive abilities will probably be permanently impaired because during their growth years they have not been able to get sufficient nutrition.
You also commented that it's like 10 to a room in Gaza. The density is unbelievable. That it's a land where the Arab just is to disappear.
Certainly be warehoused. My colleague Jeff Halper, who's Israeli and was on the boats with us, describes it as the warehousing of a population. But there are various terms: Bantustan concentration camp.
To put it in perspective, I worked out the numbers. You'd have to take Mexico City's population, double it, plop it into King County, and it still wouldn't. It would only then just approximate the density of Gaza. Lauren Booth, who is sister-in-law to Tony Blair, former Prime Minister of Britain, made the analogy that it's a concentration camp rather than a prison.
That's in the book. She describes a British prison where inmates are guaranteed 3 square meals a day, that they have mental health counseling, that they have visits from relatives, and that they also know when their sentence is up.
And that they committed a crime to even be there.
And they had due process. Yeah. And of course, the people in Gaza have none of that. So Gaza they've described it as the world's largest prison, but